All right, everyone, welcome to another edition of the Heretics Review Show. So today is the second part of our two-parter on this great movie, uh, The Last Airbender. And if you remember the first part, we talked about just how great the movie was and also how terrible it was. And now we want to do a deeper dive, into the 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 background of the creators and the ideas and um, how the originators differed from M. Night Shyamalan and his vision and why that was. So we go from these two guys here, who are, as we mentioned in the last episode, very Caucasian, and I don't believe that any of them have a non-white bone in their body, um, but they were able to successfully, in my opinion, create a world where uh, minorities and brown skin and yellow skin and all kinds of different colored skins were able to exist and be, very respectable and matter of fact type of society. Of course, that society still had its problems with prejudice, right? They went from uh, a, a class system to other types of caste systems within the story itself. It wasn't so much about skin color as it was about who can bend whatever element and who couldn't. And so it was I think a good point that was made that if it isn't skin color, it's going to be something else, and that is the human condition. Um, it's actually not just the human condition, right? It's also the animal condition, right? This is how it is in the animal kingdom, right? There isn't an animal out there that doesn't hate another animal because of his stripes, right? So,
Well, I don't know that animals are capable of hate, but they do. I mean, they eat each other, but I don't think it's with malice. I don't think animals
uh,
have that. Um, I think we were kind of getting into this some question marks about sort of two levels here. So one level is two white guys creating a world that ultimately doesn't have any white people in it. Um, but taking some liberties along the way. So the liberties that they take in this case are um, in eye color, that they match each little society's eye color to their element. So water has blue eyes, air has kind of like grayish eyes, as you can see there, and so forth. And then the second layer is how M. Night Shyamalan, I'm never going to say his name correctly, I'm sure of it. Anyway, um, has has taken some liberties as well. And one of the things that Shyamalan said, and looking at this, it's kind of a good illustration of that, is he said that the cartoon was racially ambiguous. So that allowed him to cast white people in that role. Of course, he gets the racial ambiguity from like the eye color. If Katara and Sokka had brown eyes, then there would be no racial ambiguity. But because they have blue eyes, then and they're, I guess, cartoons, then he takes that to mean that there's racial ambiguity. However, his concept of racial ambiguity is very um, convenient because, as you can see from the background, he does not have the same degree of racial ambiguity of the other villagers, just the protagonists and apparently their grandmother. Um, so where he can get away with it, he's going to, the people who have speaking lines, people in front of the camera, he's going to cast them as white. But everyone in the background who runs around does, in fact, appear to be Native American or Inuit. You can see in the background, it's pretty obvious that. So, you know what I'm saying? He has a very clear vision for background characters, what they should be. There's no like diversity in those characters. It's not unambiguous. It's very clear. But for the foreground characters, he has a similar, you know, concept. So for example, he matches the siblings. They're both white, not one of them white, one of them not white. So he doesn't interpret that, you know, he interprets racial ambiguity in a very specific way. And so it seems that it's really, you know, I'm trying to search for the word, but suspect. Like his concept of, you know, using this concept of racial ambiguity is quite suspect because it's not really ambiguous. And it's not consistent. So, you know, the word I'm looking for, and perhaps Nick, you can help me. Man, I don't know why this word is escaping me right now, but it is disingenuous. There we go. So I think he's being disingenuous. I think that he's using this concept of racial ambiguity as a crutch to get around the fact that he didn't want to cast, you know, and perhaps he was limited in doing so. Perhaps there's studio powers that said, well, we're not going to have two Native American and Inuit people as starring roles in this movie. It just can't happen. But you know, he did that, and that's kind of the irony of this is because whereas the original is pretty, despite being created by two white people, two white men, the original seems, you know, to honor, you know, other cultures pretty well. Then when M. Night has a turn at this, he kind of backtracks some of that and instead comes up with a fairly disingenuous interpretation of all these characters, and a lot of different ways that is totally inconsistent. So, you know, I think that's part of the issue. It's not the whole issue, but it's what makes The Last Avatar, I think, worth talking about, is because it's not just about this show, but other, you know, there's the question of how, you know, they call it race washing, where you're going to take, for example, a black character and recast him as white, or a white character and recast him as black, or a different race, you know, kind of changing. You know, they did this in Hunger Games, right? One of the characters that was white in the story became black in the movie. And they did that because they wanted more balance and so forth. So, you know, and I think the other kind of element to this is this idea that you cannot have a Hollywood movie, you can't have a big feature film without white characters in it, because the white characters give permission to the non-white characters. You know what I'm saying? It's like you can't go forward. It's like, where's the white character? You know, you got to have, you know, there has to be, it's like it's having a parent in the room, you know, where is the white character in this that gives permission to all of the other characters?
This is an interesting point that you bring up. So basically what you're saying is, in order for it to be a legitimate Hollywood movie, you got to have a white hero. But it's interesting that Shyamalan, this is his family here that we saw. I mean, you know, his family is, his immediate family is not white, and yet you brought up something interesting. Is that he actually was adopted? Is that correct? Adopted.
You know, I don't know his personal history. I wouldn't say that. But what I would say is that I don't know if Shyamalan is under a different pressure as a minority director than you know, a white counterpart, or if they'd be under the same pressure. At some point, he has to deal with studio people, and when he comes with this project and says, okay, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to have in our starring role 2 Native American people, and then one ostensibly Chinese person, which would be Aang. You know, he says all of this, and the studio execs are like, Yeah, I'm not sure about that. That doesn't, how is that going to work? Because at the end of the day, this thing made 300 some odd $1 million. And so that's a success. So, you have to kind of brass tacks it and say, is that success only possible because of the two white faces we see there? That if those faces had been brown faces, um, that the audience would have rejected it at the time. And I think it's a little bit different for us now in 2022 to look back at 2010. I know that's 12 years, but still, is it a situation where people would have avoided this movie because of that, the racial factor? And is that what the studio execs did to Shyamalan? Did he even have a choice in it? You know, he might have come up with the lie of racial ambiguity just because he had, he was pressured into accepting, white leads. And he doesn't necessarily, because he wants to continue working in Hollywood, he doesn't want to call out the people in Hollywood that forced him to make that decision. We don't know. We don't know if it was his specific sole decision or if, the people with the money made that decision for him. However, that being said, Shyamalan is a big enough director that he could have taken a different project on. And I guess that makes you look around and say, okay, well, what Shyamalan projects has he taken on that really feature in a starring role a minority character?
I was just going to bring that up. So we got here, The Happening, Mark
Wahlberg.
We got here The Village.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, basically, I don't remember any non-white person in that movie, actually.
Well, yeah, and that's the Village is worth talking about all in of itself because it's effectively a white supremacy utopia. That he's made a movie and he just kind of casually forgets the fact that this is a white supremacist, mecca.
And of course, what is it? The Shape of Water or whatever it is.
You must be thinking of Lady in the Water.
Lady in the Water. There we go.
Lady in the Water did have one Latino cast member. I cannot remember his name, but he was the same guy from Planet Terror. He was also in one of the TV shows like 6 Feet Under or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, but I thought that movie was terrible.
Yeah, it was pretty awful.
Of all, I like a lot of his movies, but that movie I thought was terrible.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. But Signs, and then we go to the Bruce Willis one. Obviously, Sixth Sense, and then when you actually do have a big black cast member, a famous black cast member, that's going to be Glass, in which case he plays the villain. It's almost jarring when you watch Shyamalan movies because he often casts himself as an extra, a background character, and he's like the only minority background character anywhere. It's just like white, a sea of white people, and it's Shyamalan because he's the only brown person there. So I don't think that Samuel Jackson really is very good to bring into this mix because he plays a villain, and it's kind of bad when the only black person that you've ever cast in any of your movies is a villain. I mean,
Yeah, but he was a very good villain.
I don't deny it. I don't deny it. He did a good job. Of course, he did a good job, but that doesn't really speak to representation.
They could make a comic book series on his character alone because that was wow. But anyways, yeah, go on.
Well, I'm just saying it doesn't speak to a positive aspect of representation. It's different if you see, a lot of different roles played by minority characters, and then one of them happens to be. But in this particular case, in Avatar, it's fascinating because not only does he not cast the lead roles as Native American or Inuit, but he then also doesn't cast. He cast Dev Patel, and Dev Patel is kind of a strange choice for Zuko because it's very and then his uncle is a completely different nationality. So you have this thing where most of the Fire Nation people are effectively or appear to be Indian in nationality or ethnicity, and then his uncle is Iranian. And it's like, well, it's close in the world. It's not quite
close. It's I throw a
but
dart.
but it's different if you say, okay, well, there's all kinds of people there, but it's really not that way. It's really like all of the Water Tribe people are Inuit. All of the Earth Tribe people are Chinese. All of the, like the Fire Nation is Indian. He really does set up these very distinct racial identities for these groups, except for the leads. Then you get Iroh. It's like, what's Iroh doing there? Is there no Indian, actor who would then fit in with his like racial identity? I actually don't even mind if he wanted to say that the Water Tribe is white people. It's not what the creators had in mind, but I don't begrudge him that decision. I mean, there's certainly a question of like kind of whitewashing, taking minority characters and recasting them in white roles. That still exists, and I'm not saying that's a good idea, but it's even worse when he's inconsistent about it. When the background people are non-white and the foreground people are white, it very much gives this sort of like white savior, look to the film. Where, and again, it goes to that whole permissions issue. You just don't even have a movie unless you have white people standing around to give permission to all the minority characters. So it's just very confusing.
The Last Samurai has to be, Tom Cruise. Don't get me wrong, my wife was like, "Oh, Tom Cruise," but I was just like, "This is ridiculous." Not only was he a cowboy, but he was in Japan and he became the last samurai. That's just ridiculous.
Well, I think that goes down to kind of our own sort of Western disrespect for Toshiro Mifune. Because when you go through the lists of greatest actors, there's almost no one who ever says Toshiro Mifune, but in my mind, he is like probably the greatest actor. I mean, if you've seen obviously half of the Kurosawa films in which he stars, but he doesn't just star as a samurai. He goes and stars in other dramatic roles as well, and he's just amazing in every single one of them. I mean, we should do a whole show on Toshiro Mifune. I mean, he's that good.
That would be more than a show.
but that's the level.
I find it very good that I don't mind so much if they readapt or adapt a foreign movie into an American movie, or vice versa. I don't mind that. But I do what I think you're right. What I do mind is when you have this kind of identity of this group of people, that is non-white, and you decide to make the lead role white just because.
It's
I don't know
bad.
For what reason?
Yeah.
No, I do understand. The movie Vikings. Yes, they're white. They're Vikings. That's fine. That's historically accurate. What is not historically accurate is Vikings, and then there's one villain who is, I don't know, from the Aborigine of Australia or something, and it's like he owns like a part of land because he's
well, and I find that those sort of historical films actually aren't always completely accurate, because there actually often was more diversity than we give credit for. I mean, maybe not in Vikings specifically, but there's a expression of Black Irish, because
I think for the Viking movies, I think you're right. They traveled the world. They must have met a lot of people,
right? And sometimes they exactly that's my point. Like the Black Irish, and I might be completely off my rocker here, but to my knowledge, what this is the Spanish Armada sailed from Spain and include Moorish soldiers, and then where their fleet was broken apart by the English, but then the survivors of that naval conflict wash up on the shores of England and Ireland and various places. And so then you have people of Moorish descent, i.e. black, marrying and into Irish and Scottish and English. So it's like we we but if you go to historical and you have someone with darker skin and it's Ireland, they'll be like, oh, that's historically inaccurate. Well, no, that's really what happened.
If Shakespeare can do it.
Yeah, I mean, Shakespeare's talking about Othello, so he
Yeah,
obviously has some experience with a black man in the 1500s in England.
exactly. So, but anyways, so let's get back to this final bit here. I think that we have established that this is so just to give a little background. Andrews and I, we have been talking about this back and forth, and at first I was like, it's not whitewashing, it's not this and that, and now I'm convinced that it is. But the first thing we had to define was, what is whitewashing? Is it
Yeah.
just putting a white character there? No, it's not.
Well, I think the movie The Departed is actually a really good example here, because if I'm correct, I can't remember, but I believe that The Departed is effectively based on a Hong Kong movie that they made a Hong Kong version of. It might have been Old Boys or whichever it was, but they made a version of The Departed in Hong Kong, starring Hong Kong actors. Then they took the story and they moved it to Boston, and they recast everyone as people from Boston. The story is the same, but the setting is completely different and the actors are completely different. So in this case, we don't blame them for recasting everyone as white, even though the original characters were Asian, because they changed the setting, they did an adaptation. This all makes sense. And so no one's going to say that that's whitewashing, right?
Yeah.
It's an adaptation, which is fine. But this is just a really bad example because it's so obvious where, they're we look in the background and we see characters that are obviously quite different than we see in the foreground.
Yeah.
And that's just awful. It feels terrible to watch that.
I think that what you mentioned earlier is the idea or the concept that you need a white character in the lead to legitimize the show. I think that is the key to whitewashing. I think that's the turning point for me to realize, that is not good.
Well, it's like if you think about what makes a black TV show a black TV show. So, like what made Cosby, was Cosby a black TV show or was it not a black? Because these things get categorized. So certain things become or it doesn't just have to be black. It could be Asian TV show or so forth. In that it's the presence or absence of significant white characters that makes it either a black TV show or not a black TV show, or an Asian TV show or not an Asian TV show.
Convenience, for example.
Yeah, the second that a white
Korean
person
show.
shows up.
But it's not just Koreans.
Right, but the second a white person shows up, then it has a general appeal. But if that white person's not present, then it's an Asian show.
Yeah. Yeah, I got you. I hear you.
It's just like, for example, you could go this with LGBT as well. So if the protagonist is gay, then it's a gay show. If the protagonist's not, like you go to Jack and Grace, what was it? Will and Grace. It's an NBC TV show that, but how they cater to that is it a gay show? Is it not a gay show? And they stay on the side, in my opinion, they stay on the sidelines of truly, deeper gay issues enough to be not a gay show.
Yeah, that's this whole idea of, during that time it was a pretty what's the word during that time, during that era, it was a pretty bold show, I guess. If you were to show that today, everyone would think it's a terrible show, which they did. It's a terrible show. I don't care if he's gay or not gay. It's a terrible show. But because they showed that back in the day, it was very bold. It was a very bold statement. So I do appreciate that much, but I mean, it is a terrible show. I mean, the writing, dialogue,
But
everything about it is terrible.
that
Characters,
this
fine, whatever. But
this show
you know,
is a step backwards. This particular show,
yeah,
this movie, Last Avatar, is a step backwards because the original was a step forward. Because the original was a world
yes,
without white people, and
yeah,
that, you know, I think that is a fantastic thing. Why shouldn't there be so? Because
yeah,
I mean, you certainly have watched television shows, especially fantasy shows, right? That they're like, you know, like what did it take? It took until I guess somewhere in Empire Strikes Back, you finally saw Lando Calrissian, who's the first like non-white character, and pretty much the only non-white character in the original trilogy. So it's like you really had to go there. I mean, fortunately, they did a good job with that character, but it's like even in space, you know, like some weird place in a million years from now, it's still all white people. You know, you go to place things like even in Star Trek, you know, it's sometimes you just have like walking down the hallway and there's just nothing but white people, white people, white people. Even if some of the leads are non-white, it's still so overwhelmingly white in all of these, like Game of
yeah.
Thrones or
To be fair though, the original series had, you know, uh, what's his name, um, Hulu or whatever his name. I can't remember his name right now.
oh
But,
yeah, George Sakai,
Uhura, George
Nichelle,
Takei, you know, Russian
Nichols.
and
No,
Ashkenazi
I get
Jewish
that. I
people.
get that. But
Having said
walk
that,
down the hallway.
yes, yes,
Walk down the hallway, they're all white.
yes,
You know what I'm saying? All
absolutely.
the red shirts, everyone else who shows up on that show is white.
Yeah, there were a couple episodes though where they had, you know, some unknown races in there. Like, I
Oh,
think the
oh, and
Mongolians.
don't go to the people that are wearing, I don't know what you call it, blackface, yellow face, brown face. I'm not sure,
In the
but
day.
you know that the original Klingons, they're white
Oh yeah,
people, you know, with
I don't
paint on their
know if
face.
can you really label that as that is a
Oh, for sure.
that is a
They were clearly meant to be Mongolians. The Klingons were clearly meant to be Mongolians. It was a reference back to Genghis Khan. I mean, that
yeah.
was just that was made super clear. So it was absolutely, you know, a
What were
brown
the
face.
Vulcans then? Because they were green, you know.
No, Spock was white. All Vulcans were white.
No, they're green. They
Their
have
blood
green
might be
blood.
green. Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
their blood.
they're
Yeah,
they're a hint
their
of green.
their faces were quite white, you know, and all of them were white up until what is it, Voyager? Voyager was the first
Oh
one where
yeah,
you saw like a
Tuvok. Yeah,
black
Tuvok.
Vulcan.
Yeah.
But okay,
Well,
but
not to get into Star Trek
staying
so
with Avatar,
same with this one.
it's atrocious because it's just so obvious, and it's not the only problem with this film. There's so many other problems with this film that I think are problems of logic or problems of consistency. Um, it's and especially it's a problem if you watch the series first. If you watch the series first and you see just how terribly they do everything that happens in the show, it just everything about this is a terrible idea. Um, but I think that the one thing that stands out most, even over the terrible writing, because you can watch a film with terrible writing and not be like sickened by it, but watching this and seeing how this was an opportunity for them to actually cast, you know, Native American actors in a mainstream Hollywood film, and they didn't do that, and that's just awful. It just feels terrible to watch that, to see that this was an
Yeah,
opportunity. I mean, this could have made someone's career,
yeah,
you know,
it could
and
have.
it didn't.
Yeah. So just to rehash so that you know, so I think we've established that this was a negative step back for Hollywood in regards to diversity. But even though it was a very diverse cast, it was uh, overall a step backwards. But we see here another thing here, and this is my point here is that you see these guys at the beginning before the film was released, they were all supporting the film and this and that. And then when they saw that it was panned, they were against it. They were against it. Like, oh, you know,
uh,
we didn't have anything to do with it. Blah 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 blah. So that's right there. That is the crux of it. I think that bottom line, these guys are not, saints. They want to make money, and they probably did make some money.
Well,
That,
I don't blame them on the movie.
no, you can't blame them on a movie. This
Yeah,
movie obviously was
but we have
well
hope for the
Shyamalan.
future. I think we can end this on a hopeful note because we've all seen, and I don't, we've all seen where Netflix is going with this next. And even if it's a terrible show for some reason or another, the casting really appears excellent. They're actually casting Native American actors in the water tribe roles. They're actually casting Chinese, like the Zuko is someone who appears
Yeah.
Chinese. Um, so they're matching the ethnicity of the original show in the casting this time. And I'm really excited about that. I'm really honestly excited to see a mainstream show. I don't know, this is crazy for me to say, but doesn't have a white face in it. I mean, I'm okay with that.
You mean like this one?
Yeah, I don't need to see that. It's like I don't feel the need to see myself represented in absolutely everything that I watch. That's not
Who doesn't
necessary.
belong here? Who doesn't belong here?
Right? Right? I'm okay. I like watching things that show other things besides myself, besides just more white people.
So
It's not necessary to keep going with that.
So I fell in love. Obviously, I had no idea of what this last Airbender was about. So I fell in love with the actual show after watching the movie. And so the movie, I thought, as far as action and plot and all this stuff, I thought it was great dialogue. Yeah, but um, of course, this whole negativity with the
Yeah.
whitewashing, that's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
either, obviously. But just on an objective stance on regards to plot and um, cinematography, I thought it was pretty good. I would probably give it a 7 out of 10. You
Has your
know,
opinion changed since?
as my but so I am looking forward because I have seen all of the Airbender or the Last Avatars and all that stuff. Korra, I have seen all those, and I'm looking forward to this TV series coming up. However, the originators who were at first a part of it have now said that they are no longer working with the studio to go forward with this. So the series will still go forward, but they don't want any part of it. And I wonder what what it was that they kind of like argued against, because they did say that they were uh, like they had creative differences with the
It could just be money, honestly. They might not be paid what they're looking to be paid. Who knows what reason for walking away is? All that I know is that Nickelodeon got the message that when we see the people, we see the casting from Iro to Zuko to their casting is just absolutely spot on.
so I guess we just
And
have to wait to see how the actual movie is. But this is a red flag here. I think this does not bode well when you have
I'm not worried about it
this.
because in the end, I'm not expecting this to be, Oscar worthy. If it's just a fun show that is truer to the original, okay.
Yeah.
I don't need it to be fantastic. So the fact that it,
I just
that
love
they
this. I just love this picture right here.
the fact that they fix the whitewashing from the original show is enough for me. That's all I need. I'll watch it.
Call this whiteface? Would you call this white?
Well, well, of course she's doing kabuki, right? Or something similar to that. So it's
Is she
it's
missing an
a
arm here? Is she missing
it's
an
a
arm there?
racial.
Is she
Who
missing an
knows?
arm?
Well, she's not in the show, so
It looks like
I
she's
don't know what
missing
that
an arm
is.
there. That's kind of crazy. But anyways.
Yeah. So yeah, we
All
can
right.
look
Well,
forward to the remake,
yeah.
the live action remake, and hopefully all of our distaste for what has happened in the movie is washed away with a truer interpretation.
I like that. I like that. Truer interpretation. I really do like that. So, anyways, I think that's all the time we have for part 2, and we'll look forward to the next episode and see where we go from here. I do believe that we should do, like you mentioned earlier, a reactionary.
Yeah,
video, which is
we'll look at
pretty
it. I don't
popular.
know. I don't know if I'm
We'll
ready
have
to
to
spend
pick a
more
show.
time on this movie because really it's
Yeah, I
just
think we've beaten it to death.
it's brutal.
This is a
We'll have to think
pretty
of
deep
something else.
dive. Pretty deep dive. So
All
we'll
right.
move on to something else. But anyways,
Sounds
all
good.
right, everyone. Have a good one.